Well, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the 2019 Budget and Audit Committee. I want to welcome members of the public, members of staff, and council as well. And before we begin to council, are there any declarations of pecuniary interest? Seeing none, I'm going to turn it over to Dave, Deputy City Manager Dave Bush, to make some opening comments. Dave?
Good afternoon, Chairman, Vice Chair Reid, and members of the committee. The draft 2019 budget includes the city's operating, water utility, and capital budgets. The 2019 proposed rate changes and impact to the homeowner are calculated on an average house assessed at $310,200. The proposed 2019 rates: property tax increase 3.72 or $50 annually. Water utility increase 4.31, which equates to $48 annually. So the total impact annually for the average household is $98. Leading up to the proposed 2019 changes, we had a series of public information sessions, January 21st in Hespeler, January 30th at the Idea Exchange, and January 31st in Preston. The intent of the public forums were for residents to come forward, learn, and provide input into the budget decision-making process. Also, the public were also asked for feedback online for the 2019 budget process on engagecambridge.ca. So that was an online survey format for input from residents. The public engagement ran from January 21st right through to February 4th. On that note, I would like to acknowledge and thank the finance team for the preparations for today and the ongoing discussions around the budget and their contributions from city staff in putting the budget together. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Dave. And just before we get started, I too want to make some comments, and I want to acknowledge a couple of people. Katie Fisher and her team have done a tremendous job in getting us to where we are today. Katie was asked to take over the finance position for a time, and she was able to work with members of her team and other staff within the organization and develop a very good, very informed public information series that went out on the road. And thank you for that, Katie, and thank you to those who helped you as well. And I know there are a number of people, so I won't name them, but I know you can go back and thank them for us. We really appreciate that. A year ago, we started at 5.7%. We anticipated that we would come to today with a 5.7% increase for 2019. And staff have done a tremendous job at bringing it down to 3.72%. But again, that's a starting point for us. And I think we are in a position here to make some tough decisions, because I think everyone around the horseshoe and in the audience would like to see the tax rate at its lowest possible increase. And that's what we're striving for today and over the next few days. What we're going to do this afternoon is our newest member, our newest Chief Financial Officer, Cheryl Ayers, is going to give us an overview of our budget. First, we'll go over the water and sewer, the capital, and the operating budget. And once that is complete, we'll go back to the water and wastewater for approval. We'll go back to the capital for approval, followed by delegations for the operating budget. I anticipate that we won't get past anything more than the delegations this evening, and we will reconvene on Monday to continue with the operating budget. But I do anticipate that we will complete and approve the water and wastewater and capital today and get started into the operating. We have supper scheduled for 5 o'clock, and we will have one break between now and then. And after supper is when we will have the delegation start. And there will be no decisions made on any delegations until once all have been heard, so that we can make an informed decision about where we go with the budget. So having said that, I'm going to ask Cheryl to come forward and proceed to walk us through the wastewater, capital, and operating budget.
So thank you, Chairman and committee members, for the opportunity to present the 2019 budget for the City of Cambridge. As has already been mentioned, I too wanted to take a moment to acknowledge Katie Fisher in her leadership in developing the budget this year, and the staff in finance and the staff across the city. As you mentioned, I've been here less than a month, new to the city, so I've not been involved in preparing the budget, but there's been a lot of great teamwork led by Katie in developing the budget this year, so thank you, Katie. As you know, the annual budget includes three components. There's the water budget, the capital budget, and the tax-supported operating budget. Altogether, those three components add up to a total budget of $247 million to provide the programs, services, and infrastructure to the community. The Chair has gone over the agenda for the budget process this year. Just as a reminder, there's been some opening remarks. The delegations are going to come later in the day, doing the staff presentation now, and once that is complete, committee will have the opportunity to ask questions of staff on the water budget and deliberate that, and then we will move into questions and deliberation of the capital budget, and then questions and deliberations on the operating budget. And then once all that is complete, we'll have council approval of our 2019 budget. The city budget is the culmination of ongoing engagement on public priorities that start with the strategic plan, followed by master plans, public meetings, online engagement, and informal feedback. The budget is prepared taking into consideration this input as well as direction from council. In 2016, Cambridge Council approved the strategic plan, Cambridge Connected, Our Voice, Our Vision. The plan provides a foundation for decision-making, priority setting, and ongoing performance management in order to deliver high-quality public service that meets the needs of the community. The 2019 budget has been prepared with the vision and goals of the strategic plan in mind. Cambridge's vision is a place for people to prosper, alive with opportunity. Through this vision, there were 7 goals developed. The first one being community well-being, which promotes a caring community where people can make strong connections with others and lead safe, healthy, and productive lives. The goal of governance and leadership is to provide open, transparent, accountable, and innovative leadership in local governance and service delivery. Arts, culture, heritage, and architecture promotes a creative environment that encourages arts, culture, heritage, and values our unique architectural assets. Being good stewards of the rivers, waterways, and natural environment that the community enjoys is the goal of Environment and Rivers. Parks and Recreation goal is to facilitate and deliver a range of accessible and diverse recreation opportunities. And under the prosperity vision, we have the goal of economic development and tourism, which supports and promotes a strong, dynamic, and innovative local economy. And finally, transportation and infrastructure creates and maintains a highly effective, sustainable, and coordinated local infrastructure and transportation network. Now, looking at each of these goals within the strategic plan, I'll discuss how the budget supports each of them. Under community well-being, the operating budget includes the annualized operating impact for the new fire station number 6, and it includes an implementation of an enhanced model for Service Cambridge to improve customer service to the community. The water budget under community well-being continues to provide clean water through the purchase of water treatment from the region of Waterloo. And under the community well-being goal, the key projects included under the capital investment plan include security camera enhancements, special event public safety barricades, Newman Drive sidewalk installation, and cemetery improvements. Under the goal of governance and leadership, the operating budget includes investments in information technology to support innovation and improve data management. And as well, there has been some improvements in the city tax department, which has resulted in lower penalties and interest on balances. Under the capital investment plan, there's a project to update the strategic plan 2020 to 2023. There's further technology improvements included in that budget, and a corporate facilities master plan and fueling strategy. Under the goal of arts, culture, heritage, and architecture, the operating budget includes funding to support community events such as Canada Day, Cambridge Celebration of the Arts, and Christmas in Cambridge. This budget also includes operation of the old post office Idea Exchange location. The capital investment plan supports key projects, including the East Galt Heritage Conservation District study and heritage restoration for the Centre for the Arts and David Deward Centre. Environment and Rivers operating budget includes an increased contribution to the renewal and replacement of the city's infrastructure, and the water budget provides health and safety treatment of wastewater through the purchase of the water through the region of Waterloo. The capital investment plan under Environment and Rivers includes projects such as Queen Street, Burnett Ave, and Eagle Street pumping stations, urban forest renewal, and rehabilitation of stormwater ponds. Under Parks and Recreation, the operating budget includes investment in aquatics, leisure, and youth programming, and older adult recreational programming. This budget also includes an increased contribution to the replacement and renewal of the city infrastructure that supports parks and recreation activities. The capital budget includes Galt Arena energy management, Whitmer Park improvements, River Bluffs dock replacement, lighting improvements in Riverside Park, and Soper Park and Riverside Walkway. And the final vision of prosperity includes economic development and tourism. The operating budget has an overall decrease this year due to increased non-tax sources of funding for development planning and building operations. And in capital budget includes key projects such as Main Street improvements, King Street improvements, and new collector roads in the east side lands north of the 401. And finally, under transportation infrastructure, the operating budget includes routine road maintenance and maintains parking lots in the downtown cores. The water budget under this area supports water and sewer infrastructure to ensure continued availability of clean drinking water. And the capital budget includes reconstruction of Blair Road and Elliott Street, Blenheim Road redesign. As has been mentioned, through the budget process this year, there has been some public engagement so that we can hear the voice of the community or some of the community into what the priorities are for the budget. There were 3 budget info series hosted where staff presented how the 2019 draft budget aligns with the community's objectives as laid out through the 7 goals of the strategic plan. While that was going on, at the same time, there was the online engagement through Engage Cambridge portal, where residents were asked to identify their top 3 priorities out of the 7 goals within the strategic plan and provide comments on why each one of them they felt is a priority. And I just want to point out it's important to note that this survey is not statistically valid, as anybody could log in and fill out the comments and questions. So it's not statistically valid, but it is a representation of some of the voice of the community. So through that online engagement, the most important goal that was identified that you can see on this bar graph on this slide up here is community well-being. The majority of respondents provided comments saying that support to the hospital they feel is a priority under the community well-being goal. The second highest priority goal, as noted with 24 respondents, was transportation and infrastructure. And under that, the comments were for improved safety and maintenance of roadways, traffic congestion, traffic light syncing, and streetscaping. The third priority, as identified, was the goal of environment and rivers, and the comments under that were improved water quality. River and trees are important to the quality of life. And through the budget info series, we heard a lot of feedback about how affordability of the budget is important to the community. So looking at the water utility budget, this slide shows the total budget to provide that service to the community is $67.5 million. That is primarily made up of contract services, which represents the biggest component of the budget at 56%. There's some transfers of funds in there, materials, supplies, salaries and benefits, and so on. The water utility budget is funded primarily through user fees, the rates that we charge homeowners and businesses within the community at 98%. There's also a small portion of revenue from penalties and interest and transfers from reserves. The annual water utility bill provides funding to the city and to the region. The city's portion of the total bill makes up 59%, while the region receives 41% of the funding. The increase to an average consumer as proposed through the 2019 budget for water service is 4.31%, which equals $48 for average usage. That 4.31% includes the regional portion of the funding or of the expenses, the budget. The city's portion is an increase of 2.25% or $25, and the region's portion is 2.06%, which is $23. And then you can see on this slide the breakdown and how it relates to the goals within the strategic plan. The estimated annual water bill for Cambridge residents is approximately equal to the provincial average in 2018 as calculated by BMA Management Consulting in their 2018 municipal study. It exceeds the average for large municipalities with populations greater than 100,000. BMA explains in their study that there's variability in setting water and wastewater rates between municipalities that leads to this greater diversity that you can see on this chart. And part of that variability is in terms of setting aside funding for the renewal and rehabilitation of the infrastructure in the future. So Cambridge, along with Kitchener, is quite proactive at making sure that we are setting aside funds in reserves for future maintenance and rehabilitation of the assets so that we can continue to provide the service. Whereas some other communities are not as proactive at setting aside that funding. So they tend to fall on the lower end of the scale for their overall estimated annual water billing. If we look at affordability of Cambridge's water bill, through the BMA municipal study, they've identified what the estimated average household income is and compared that to the water bill to come up with an estimate of 1.1% of the average household bill is going towards water service. This is in line with Kitchener and slightly above Waterloo. And I think it's also important to note that this rate of 1.1% is in line with the provincial average. Staff have prepared a multi-year budget which runs the term of council, and they've prepared estimated water utility increase comparison. So this slide shows what the increase in water rates have been since 2015, and it projects out what the anticipated rate increases will be over the term of council. This will be reviewed annually through the budget process. Now if we move on to the capital budget, the total capital budget included within your packages for 2019 is $61.9 million, and we've prepared a 10-year forecast for the capital budget, which is $462 million. The capital budget has been aligned with the goals, as I mentioned, of the strategic plan, and I talked about some of the key projects within each of those goals earlier. This next slide shows the total budget of $61.9 million broken down into various functions. As you can see, the greatest investment being made through the capital budget is towards linear infrastructure, which includes things such as roads and water mains. So that makes up a significant portion of the 2019 budget for capital. The capital budget is primarily funded from development charges. Council recently had a presentation from Watson Associates on development charges, and that funding is coming from new residents that are moving into the community so that we can continue to provide the infrastructure and services that the existing community receives. I think another portion of the budget is funded through the water utility bills, and only 10% of the budget is actually funded through property taxes, and then there's some other funding from debt and reserves. The capital budget provides funding for the rehabilitation of assets to maintain them in a good state of repair, and new infrastructure required to support growth in the community, such as roads, pumping stations, infrastructure, and parks. Another key project, as I previously mentioned, is updating the city's strategic plan for this term of council. There's also many projects in the budget that will be looking at rehabilitating some of our existing facilities. There are a number of projects included in the capital budget that, if approved, will create future impacts to the operating budget. So it's important for committee to realize that by approving these capital projects, there will be an impact to the tax levy in future years. This slide shows the projected impacts to the tax-supported operating budget for the various projects that will have an impact in the future. And this slide shows the impacts on the tax-supported budget. And similarly, with approval of particular capital projects in the water utility, there will be further impacts to the water utility rates. And moving on to the tax-supported operating budget, the total budget for 2019 is $117.6 million. The primary component of that budget is salaries and benefits, which is typical of any organization. Your salaries and benefits are typically your largest cost driver. Some of the other significant categories are materials and supplies, contracted services. There are some debt charges built into the budget, and utilities, rent, and financial expenses. Funding for the operating budget primarily comes from tax revenues, or our tax levy at 77%. There's also funding from user fees and charges at 12%. So that's fees that are in place for users to pay for the services that are provided to decrease the burden on the taxpayer. There's also some investment income, fines, penalties, and interest, government transfers, and other revenues. The property tax bill provides funding to the city as well as the region and the school boards. The city's portion of the tax bill makes up 36%, while the region receives 50% of the funding and school boards receive the balance of 14%. This means the city's annual budget influences a little more than 1/3 of the total tax increase. So taking that 36%, that portion of the pie that committee has control over, we are projecting a tax rate increase of 3.72% for 2019, which equals $50 on the total tax bill to the average household within the city. The total municipal portion of the bill for an average household is $1,383, and you can see from this slide how that breaks down into the goals within the strategic plan, with community well-being receiving the largest amount of support through the budget. The 2018 tax levy, in building the budget, we started with the 2018 tax levy, and we add assessment growth onto that to come up with our base budget. And it's important to note that assessment growth is not additional revenue that we have to offset increased costs within the budget. It is to offset the programs and services that we need to deliver to the new residents coming to the community, as well as the so that they have the same level of service as what the existing residents have in terms of service. The budget, so that brings us to a base budget, and then we add on to that a 1.3% increase that is related to inflationary type adjustments. So it's the increases that are needed to maintain services at existing levels. On top of that, there is operating impact for Fire Station number 6 and Fire CAD improvements, which equals 1.65% of the total budget increase projected. The other impacts from capital are, as I mentioned, impacts from capital projects that have been previously approved that are being operationalized within the 2019 budget. So that adds 0.43% to the increase in the budget. There are some growth items, which includes funding for neighborhood associations and some improvements in corporate communications. And then there's funding for the Idea Exchange location, which is 0.25%. So all of those elements added on to the base budget brings us to our 2019 tax levy, which equals a 3.72% increase over the 2018 levy. This slide shows you what the impact of the total tax bill is on an average resident or an average household within the community. So the city's portion of the budget, as I mentioned, makes up 36% of the total tax bill. And when you look at our projected increase of 3.72%, on top of the increase approved by the regional government and the education's portion of the budget, the total increase to a homeowner on their bill for 2019 will be a 2.82% increase. The estimated total average tax bill for Cambridge residents, including the region of Waterloo and the education portions, was below the provincial average for large municipalities in 2018. This is when comparing a similar type of property across municipalities with populations greater than 100,000, as calculated by BMA Management Consulting. And this slide shows that Cambridge's taxes are below, their total tax bill is below the rate that is in effect in Cambridge or in Kitchener and Waterloo. And again, looking at affordability, similar to what we did in the water utility budget, when you compare Cambridge average residential taxes to the estimated household income, we are, the taxes represent 3.8% of the income for the average household. This is an important check to determine the affordability of property taxes. And as you can see from this slide, we are in line with the affordability rates for Kitchener and Waterloo. And also, we're exactly in line with the affordability rates if you look across the province of Ontario. And again, staff have prepared a multi-year budget for the tax-supported operating budget for the 4-year term of council. The draft 2019 and projected tax rate increases for 2020, 2021, and 2022 are shown on this slide compared to the historical trend. When we look at the drivers of the projected tax increases for the 4-year term of council, this slide shows some of the impacts driving that increase. So continued annualization of the operations at Fire Station number 6. We've forecasted debt charges and operating costs associated with the multiplex that Council has been considering constructing in the future. There's also debt charges associated with the Riverside Dam project other impacts from capital projects, which I previously talked about, and then impact for the IDEA exchange. So the projected tax increase currently for 2020 is 4.71%, 2021 is 4.14%, and 2022 is 2.82%. And through the annual budget process, staff will continue to look for efficiencies in future years and try and keep that tax levy rate at a manageable increase. So in summary, the 2019 budget as proposed includes a $50 impact to the average household and a 3.72% rate impact. When you add the water utility bill, city portion and region portion on top of that, the total annual increase forecasted for the average household is $98. In addition to their tax levy and water utility rates, the cities of Kitchener and Waterloo also have separate user rates for stormwater. For the City of Cambridge, stormwater is currently included in the tax bill. Therefore, this slide compares rates across the cities in the region, including stormwater for each municipality, compared to the average household impact for household stormwater increase and the water utility increase. When including all three components, the increase for Cambridge has traditionally been in line with increases in Kitchener and Waterloo. This is based on annual water consumption of 204 cubic meters and the respective average residential assessment for each city for that year. And that concludes the presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, Cheryl. And I was going to say, just before you sit down, I'm sure staff have got questions. And so what we want to do now is we want to go back and do the wastewater budget. And I would encourage council, if you have, committee rather, if you have questions in relation to wastewater budget, then this is the time to ask Cheryl. Councillor Montero.
Thank you. Through the chair, I have a question is regarding the stormwater. Our tax increase is what we're looking at now with 3.72. Taking the wastewater out, how much of a percentage is that? What would be the difference if we took it out and billed it separately?
If we took the stormwater portion out of the tax increase?
Yes.
I'm not going to answer that. So Katie's going to, since I'm new, I don't know a lot of the details, so staff are going to support me in helping to answer some of the questions today.
We'll get Katie to help out.
Through you, the chair. The stormwater increase included in our tax increase is relatively minor. I believe it's only about $2,000 for an operating increase in the storm maintenance program. So $2,000 on an overall portion of about $800,000 or $900,000 of work there. So very minimal. However, a portion of the capital levy also supports storm, and we haven't proportioned that out. We are currently undergoing a stormwater funding review as approved by council earlier this year, and that will assess what our stormwater needs are, and those will come forward in the future.
Thank you. Can I just elaborate on that? And the reason I'm asking this question is we're being compared to our neighbor cities such as Kitchener-Waterloo. Theirs is separate. They bill it separate. Ours is included. Mm-hmm. And when it comes to the bottom line, you were comparing apples to oranges. So I would just want to clarify as to what's included on our tax bill of 3.72 compared to the other two cities that have separate charges for different things. And we're not in the same playing field.
Mm-hmm. Through you, the Chair, we haven't performed the analysis currently for this budget. We can do a quick analysis and take that away and present it on Monday to proportion out what portion of the capital levy would be supporting storm, because that would be the most significant portion of the tax rate that would be allocated to
Thank you.
the storm.
I would like that because it makes the public aware of we can't compare the way it is now to the others because they have extra charges on somewhere else on a bill. Thank you.
Councillor Devine.
Yes, thank you, and through the chair. Question to staff, and when this analysis is done, maybe I'll have the answer. But if we look at the graph, the Cambridge, Kitchener, and Waterloo, all three municipalities purchased their water from the region. Why are we so much higher for purchase of water than we are at Kitchener or Waterloo? Because Waterloo is at $870 and we're at $1,086 annualized.
My understanding for the increase is that Kitchener and Cambridge and some of the other municipalities that you see at the higher end of that graph are putting money away in reserves to fund future capital works related to maintaining the infrastructure and being very proactive at ensuring financial sustainability in the long term. Whereas some of the other municipalities that you see towards the lower end of that graph are not being as proactive at putting away funds into reserves to fund future capital works. So they will have future capital works that they need to do to maintain their infrastructure. They may have to fund that through debt or other sources of funding, whereas we are being proactive in making sure that we have money set aside in reserves to fund the rehabilitation of the assets in the future.
So what are the reserves at now? Do we know?
Sorry?
Do we know what the reserve is now? Like if we're putting money away for the future, that's good. We're saving money for the future. I'm good with that. Okay, but what is the reserve at the moment?
Katie will have that number for us.
Through you, the Chair, on page 41 of the budget detail book that was released, there are two main reserve funds referenced here. Wastewater Capital Reserve Fund, following the budget process, would have an approximate balance of $7 million. Likewise, with the Water System Capital Reserve Fund, $7.5 million. Additionally, it should be noted that we are currently underway with a long-range financial plan update for our water and wastewater, and that will be coming back to Council in 2019, and that helps direct the level of sustainable funding that we as a community want towards the water and wastewater.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor Liggett.
Through you, Mr. Chair. My question has to do with the difference between the what goes into the water and then what goes into the river part of the budget. So culverts, which are for stormwater, they're not part of the, like, why are they not in the water billing paid from that versus the capital budget, the regular capital budget?
Through the chair, culverts are part of stormwater infrastructure. So again, that's considered entirely separate from the user pay infrastructure in water and wastewater. And as Katie has mentioned, we are looking at a stormwater utility funding model right now, and you know what might be included in that to build some of that infrastructure into a utility model.
Okay.
Councillor Reid.
Thank you, Chairman. I'm back on the reserves that Councillor raised. I noticed we had transfers from the reserve funds for 1% for the water utility budget, and I'm wondering if you could tell me what were the projects that funded?
I think that's going to go back to Katie.
Yeah, sorry, I'm going to look to Katie for an answer to that one.
Through the chair, sorry, I was trying to see if I have the details easily broken out for you. Within the capital forecast details, other revenue column, so I'm looking on page 81 of the capital budget book. The water and wastewater funding is included within the other revenue column, and most of the funds within that are the water and wastewater. There are some other reserve funds as well, such as cemeteries. So if you see a cemetery project, that's not getting water and wastewater funding. However, all the roads-related projects that list funding for it are. So for example, we have infrastructure design. That's the engineering design work towards major replacement of infrastructure. The regional project for King Street Phase 1 and 2, replacing the city's water and wastewater infrastructure there. That's $3.7 million. Franklin Boulevard Improvements Project, updating our assets for water and wastewater on Franklin. Elliott Street, Melrose Street, Frederick Street, Burrow Street. Those are some road reconstructions that include the water and wastewater components. I'm just looking around. We additionally have Queen Street Pumping Station construction and decommissioning. That's a wastewater related project for $2.2 million. There's trenchless sanitary sewer rehabilitation for 1.2, and Francis Street reconstruction for 1.1. So those are the major projects receiving water and wastewater funding.
Can I do a follow-up? So in naming all of those things, that shows us that putting money into the reserve fund is really a good idea, because if we didn't have those reserve funds, I wonder if you could tell me what that kind of impact it would have on our budget.
Yes, so through the chair, again going back to page 41 that I referenced, where it talked about the reserve funds, each having approximately $7 million following budget approval. For the current year, our capital budget impact, so the money that we're proposing to spend towards capital projects, exceeds what we are contributing into the reserve funds this year. So, for example, in the wastewater capital reserve fund currently has a balance of $12 million. Following the capital investment plan as currently printed, it would be reduced down to $7 million. So that shows how the timing of capital projects can swing year over year, and why it's prudent to have some money set aside in reserve funds to deal with those sudden peaks towards capital needs.
Thank you.
Councillor Devine.
Through the chair to staff. On these, in this case, we're talking the wastewater capital reserve and the water system capital reserve, which is about, at this point, about $14.5 million. Is there, with the reserve funds, is there a cap on the reserve funds, or they just, like, do they get capped at 10 million, 12 million, 20 million, or we just keep put money in? Is there a cap to them?
Through the chair, they do have a cap which is equal to the sustainability calculations of the assets. So our current replacement value of the assets is estimated at X, and that would be the cap. That number is quite large. We are nowhere close to that cap. And it will be calculated as an update again as part of the long-range financial plan.
Okay, thank you.
I don't see any other questions. And if there are no other questions, then are we prepared to accept the water and wastewater budget presentation as presented by Cheryl? And if we are, it's an increase of 4.1%, and I would ask Assistant Chair Donna Reid if she's prepared to make that motion.
I was just trying to find the exact page where that said what it cost. Do you have it?
Yes, I do, and I'll get the clerk to read it out.
Oh, okay.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Through the Chair, the 2019 draft budget with respect to the water and wastewater, a recommendation would be that the 2019 water utility operating budget be approved in the amount of $67,498,000 with a combined water and wastewater rate increase of 4.31% for the average household consuming 204 cubic meters annually.
Yes, I'm prepared to move that.
Thank you, and do I have a seconder? Mayor McGarry? Any further discussion?
Who seconded it?
Councillor Liggett.
I guess it's not that I have a problem approving this, but my concern is that we have items that have been moved from prior years into this year's budget for different reasons, and that if we continue to do that, we're just pushing it down the road to another year's budget. So I think it should be brought to our attention all the time, at budget time, which projects have been from prior years that have been put off for whatever reason. Like I'm looking at the Wright Avenue and Goldie Avenue reconstruction of almost 1.7 million, and I know that's because we were well over budget, the estimated amount of that. So I just think we should be aware that it's not that we've got a ton of stuff in any given year. It's just that they've had to be put over from another year, and I think the public should be aware of that as well.
And thanks for that point, well taken, and we can leave that as direction to staff. Thank you. Councillor Devine.
Yes, thank you, the Chair. The increase of 4.31%, I think is a little steep, to be quite honest with you. And I do believe we have to put money in the reserve fund. I do believe that. But the question again to staff, another question, if I may. But this 4.31% increase, how much have we reduced our water leakage and waste in the city in the last year? Because I believe it had been reduced, and staff's done a real good job of reducing that. Phenomenal job, to be quite honest with you. But in that 4.31%, that also includes the water that taxpayers are paying for that's being wasted. What water loss do we currently have in the system? Can anybody tell me?
Yeah, I'd refer that specific answer to Public Works to get us that exact number for you. I know we can pull that for you. I know there has been significant work done to, for example, reduce water loss from the mid-20s down into 18, 19% range over the last couple of years. As well, the inflow infiltration into the sanitary sewer system we've also seen a significant, we're mapping significant reductions in the order, from the 33-35% range into the high 20s over the past year. So yeah, we can definitely provide that detail for you.
I would like to see that quite simply. It gives us a gauge, but And the other thing, you brought up a good point. The water that's getting into the sewer system that we're paying to treat that shouldn't be getting in there in the first place. Right? And that, again, that's a huge, huge bill. So but I would like to see that information before we pass this, to be honest with you.
Would you give James a moment to check with staff and see what he can bring back? At the same time, I think, as was stated, we've seen a significant reduction in the loss over the last probably 3 or 4 years, and we know that we put a lot of attention to that as a council and as a city staff. But water becomes our responsibility, and we are very aware of that because of what happened in Walkerton, and we want to make sure that we take all the necessary precautions when it comes to water, because that is the lifeline of our community. So I'll just leave it at that and wait for James to come back with your response, Mike. Why don't we take a break for 5 minutes? We'll break for 5 minutes and give staff a chance to confer with that. But just 5 minutes.
Oh, that's okay. Gives me something to do. Yeah.
They changed like to a career or something. It's hard to get off the big screen, but the numbers that are in black, see the problem. And there's a chart there that was pretty beige or something. Can't see it. You could see the numbers were there, but you didn't want to run.
Got it.
Just for the chart.
It's on purpose.
How are you, sir? I have the 147. I have the numbers. I don't have my freaking numbers. I don't want to make maybe. No, it doesn't have the number. My laptop. Yeah, I can get it.
It's a thing called email.
Yeah.
We're going to get started again in 30 seconds. We're going to call the meeting back to order, and I'm going to ask Yogesh to give us an update on the. I'll ask Yogesh to give us an update on the information that he's obtained, please. Can I call the committee to order?
Through you, Chair. Our water and wastewater trend on water loss and infiltration and inflow is downward since 2015. So our INI, which is inflow and infiltration, was at about 35% in 2015, and now we are down to about 24.7%. In terms of dollar amount, that equates to about $6.4 million in 2015 extra payments for treating that clean water going into the sanitary system. That's down to $3.8 million for 2018. In terms of water loss, that was about 25% in 2015, costing us about $4 million. For 2018, it's 21.7%, and it's about $3.3 million in cost of extra payments. This is a direct result of our proactive approach on capital renewal and rehabilitation strategy over the last 4 or 5 years and reducing the water loss in INI.
Thank you, Yogesh. And questions? Councillor Devine.
Yes, Yogesh, thank you very much for that information. I didn't quite catch the water portion. I can't write as quick as you can talk.
The water portion, in 2015 we had 25%,
yep.
Costing about $4 million.
Yep.
And now it's $3.3 million, and it's 21.7%. We had as much as about 19.5 last year, as down as last year. We went up a little bit this year. But overall the trend is downward.
Do you expect that trend is going to keep dropping?
To a certain level, yes. If we continue our strategy and approach to proactive repair and rehabilitation of water main. Earlier it was about 6 to 8 weeks to get to water service leak repairs.
Yep.
Now we get it within days and weeks.
Okay.
So that's helping us to get there.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions of Yogesh? Yogesh, I just have one, if I may, and that is, so that would be a direct result of our managing of our assets.
Yes.
And using our capital to replace those assets or that infrastructure as it ages. And what we do is we take the look at that and we determine whether it's time to replace or not, but to have those funds available give us the opportunity to replace as required instead of waiting for the leaks or waiting for the breaks to occur?
Yeah, so it's a proactive and predictive analysis of what's breaking and fixing what's breaking. So we did our water and wastewater long-range financial plan back in 2013, which projected that if we continue the same water loss and INI trend, we'll need about 6.9% rate increases every year. Just because of this downward trend, we were passing that efficiency back to the budget and operating budget and reducing the rate and not having to increase the rate as much as 6.9. So we are reviewing that again this year, and we'll provide the future projection from there.
Great, thanks very much, Yogesh. And any further questions as a result of that? Thank you, Yogesh.
Thank you.
So I have the motion on the floor. I have the motion to accept the water, wastewater budget. Is there any further discussion? Seeing none, I'm going to call a question. Those in favor? And it's approved unanimously. Thank you, everyone. Now what we'll do is we'll ask Cheryl to come back and we'll just review the capital budget again, and if there are any questions from committee in relation to the capital budget, Cheryl is there and ready to answer. I don't see any questions. And Councillor Reid, do you have the motion?
Are you prepared to second?
What's the motion?
Capital budget.
No, I'm not. It's not ready yet.
Okay, it is moved by myself, but I don't have a seconder yet of the 2019 draft budget around capital expenditures, so I won't read it until I get a seconder.
Do I have a seconder for the capital? Thank you, Councillor Montero.
Okay. Councillor Montero? All right, I'll read it out. That the 2019 capital expenditures and revenue sources in the amount of $61,922,600 be approved, and that in accordance with SS 5(1) of the Development Charges Act 1997 and S5 of Ontario Regulation 82/98, it is the clear intention that any excess capacity provided by any of the above referenced works will be paid by future development charges, and that any donations, grants, or subsidies applied in the 2019 capital program to projects with development charges funding are to offset the non-growth related costs of these projects. And further, that the forecasted capital expenditures and revenue sources for 2020 through 2028 be approved in the total amount of $406,500,800 to be revisited annually.
You've heard the motion. Any questions, any comments from the committee? Councillor Devine.
Thank you, through the chair. How can we approve this when we haven't heard delegations yet? There's no delegations involved here? Councillor Mann?
Delegations are for the operating budget. This is the capital.
Nothing for capital?
No.
Okay, well, I do have a question on the capital, I'll be honest with you, to staff. Fire Station 6 and fire CAD impacts. What is CAD?
Maybe Chief Main can give you the answer to that, please.
Through you, Mr. Chair. CAD is a computer-aided design, which is the CAD program. When dispatchers call, or when somebody calls into dispatch, this is the program that enters in, tells where houses are, hydrant locations, and closest fire trucks and stations. This new CAD will also be interfaced in with the police CAD, so we can also receive and know their locations and how long they're going to be.
Again, through the chair, follow-up. This CAD, is this a brand new CAD system?
Through you, Mr. Chair, this would be a brand new CAD system. Currently working with the Crisis CAD, this would be a Hexagon CAD system.
Okay, so what does Fire Station 6 have to do solely with the CAD system, the way this is worded? It says Fire Station 6 and fire CAD impacts of $1.4 million.
Just give me 1 second, I got to look at it. I don't
Thank
have
you.
it right in front of me.
It is, where they're done. Yeah, they don't. Just keep going, keep going. No, where are you?
Katie Fisher, I think, has a response for you as well, Councillor Devine.
Thank you.
I believe you're referring to the page 4 of the budget book where it lists the itemized impacts towards the tax operating budget. The Fire Station 6 and Fire CAD projects were previously approved in a prior year, and these are now operating impacts towards the operations for this year. as the work is operationalized and annualized. So they are not directly related. We have simply grouped these fire previously approved projects.
Okay, and how are they broken out? If they're two separate projects, how are they broken out? What page are you on?
Page 4.
4? Not sure which book they're looking at.
So through the chair, Station 6 impact for the current year is $1,032,000, and fire CAD is $412,000.
Okay. Okay, and again, another follow-up question on the same page. And I'm actually looking at this one here. Base budget city, 1.3%. What is that?
So this is pertaining to the tax-supported budget. It's not directly related to the capital budget, which is currently under review. That is to maintain existing service levels on the tax-supported operating budget.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor Liggett.
I actually do have a couple of questions. So one I had mentioned a few minutes ago as to what, I'd like to know which of these projects are from previous years that had to be put onto this year's, so that we know in our minds that we are struggling with doing part of previous years in with this year's. And also, I have a question with regard to the, what was it, just bear with me 1 second. The Old Mill Road culvert rehab, that was done in a prior year, so can we have an update as to why it's back on the books again, please?
And so what we'll do is I think we'll go to James and get James to answer those questions. The previous year's projects that were put off to this year or to future years, and the Old Mill Culvert rehab. If you could answer those for us, James, please.
Through the chair. Yes, so I can't say specifically, I'd have to go through and reevaluate, the whole list and see which ones have ever moved before. But you use the example of Wright Goldie, and which is a good example because it actually had been moved twice. The situation with Wright Goldie has some fairly specific issues around how we had put something into a budget. The budget estimate had been low. We tendered the project and found that we were way under budget in terms of what how the tenders were coming in. So we did make a decision to move that project out. However, what we do is we have an ongoing design program that allows us to put a number of projects literally on the shelf, ready for work. If we have to switch something out from a current project and bring something new in that hadn't been previously approved, in accordance with the funding policies for use of the capital budget. And again, what this allows us to do is work within the allocations that we have for spending capital in a current year. And keeping up with our infrastructure deficit, so that if we aren't able to do a job, we're still able to keep up with other water, sewer, road work that is already defined and designed per need. The other thing I could mention specific to the Wright Goldie project, for example, we were able to re-tender that project this year, and actually in the end we are we received a tender and have accepted a tender that's actually below the cost of the high bids that we received a couple of years ago. So in effect, I think we're ahead about $250,000 on that particular project. Another example, just the ability for us to stay light on our feet gives us some flexibility. Another example, last year we moved, and I think it was Wright Goldie also got moved last year, and maybe, I can't remember if it was Francis, to allow us to do work around the gaslight project on Fraser, Kent, and Glebe. So we have been able to use that flexibility to get us better prepared and to respond in a cost-effective manner to how the changing needs of infrastructure. Even though we try to approve a current and a 5-year capital program, we allow ourselves some flexibility that way. Does that help answer that particular question? Okay. The second question, the Old Mill Culvert, that was a project that was completed initially in 2016. Unfortunately, when that project was completed, there was an encroachment issue with the culvert. Unfortunately, the culvert extended along it's not Mill Creek, I think it's Bechtel Creek, or Blair Creek, sorry. It extended too far and beyond the right-of-way into private property on either side. So we have been working with the property owners on either side of that to make the restorations necessary to bring that culvert back into everyone's satisfaction.
So it's basically a miscommunication? Is that what we're looking at here?
What was the source
Old Mill, on Old Mill.
On Old Mill. Unfortunately, the design did not recognize that when it was built, it was being built beyond the right-of-way into private property and not open space, wetland or what we typically think is open space land.
Okay, another question on that, please, Mr. Chair. So when I look at the budget details for that project, what triggered it too for me was that also it hadn't taken into consideration of it being a heritage district. So that's correct?
That is correct as well, yes. There were some features because it was designed to more of an urban standard, which is our standard for any type of culvert and road cross section. That was part of the resolution, was to bring it back to the standard for that district.
Okay, thank you. Could I have another question, please?
Yes, go ahead.
Not for Mr. Etienne, it might be for Ms. Zanlight, or the security cameras phase 3. We haven't had an update on how they are doing for a while, right? So in order for us to keep going with this every year, and since it is a pilot project, I'm wondering how we're doing.
So I think we're going to move that over to James and have him respond to your question, please.
Through the chair, actually the program's going very well. There's been a lot of interest in it by both public and private entities where the cameras are placed. We've had lots of suggestions for the next phase, which would be phase 3. But what I'll have to do is I'll have to check in with the city clerk's department to find out in terms of the police usage of the files, because there is paperwork that they have to fill out every time that they request to use the footage, and I'm not entirely sure at this moment how many times that has been accessed to date.
So, Mr. Chair, my concern is the fact that we've already asked for this at the council table for this report of this pilot project And here we are approving another year of it and added more cameras, but we haven't had the update that was already requested. So.
And I think what we'll do is we'll try and get that update sooner rather than later. Unless, James, have you got any further information in relation to that update?
It's just the project is put back in because it is something that has received a lot of positive feedback. And I think in the next hour or so, we can find out from our deputy city clerk as to how many times the police force has accessed the footage. As I said, there is a process, so there is paperwork on record of its usage.
Then we'll let the city clerk take a look at that and see what we can come back with and get back to you with an answer. Councillor Mehta.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Through you, I just have a general question. I just noticed in here there are 2 lines regarding land acquisition. And I know it's a sensitive topic. I know we can't get the location in that. But is there a general reason of why we would set that money aside? Like, just something general that you could tell us? Or do we have to go into close to get an answer? Thank you.
I'm going to turn that over to Yogesh and see if he can give us some basic information on that.
I can share the information, project-specific information with you later on, but there are, one is with the road project and the associated land acquisition. It's gone through the EA process, and the other one is parking lot and the acquisition of the land. Parking lot.
Thank you, Yogesh. And we do have the motion on the floor. We have one outstanding question from Councillor Liggett. And in order to get that answer, I want to get that answer before we vote on the motion. So I want to take a short recess while we get that answer. So we will take a break. Sorry, Yogesh, you have further information?
Yes, not on the security camera, from the list from the carryover from the other years to this year's. That was a question as well. So the other project, I just scanned through the list. The one is the Blair Road construction. That was approved in 2014 or 15 for construction. There was some design issues and conflict we were able to resolve and move it forward, so it's back on the book now for this year. And the next one is East Coast Heritage Conservation District Study. I think that was put in last year, and through the council deliberation, it was moved for a year. So those are the 2 projects I could remember.
Thank you, Yogesh. Councillor Liggett.
So I'm the one who asked for that to be removed from a prior year so that we could go forward with the Downtown Heritage District, put the monies towards that, and I see they're both on the budget. I just want it out there, unless there's something looming in the East Galt area that hasn't been brought to my attention that would put it in danger. I'd like to, later on when we look at what we need to cut, possibly refer that to another year again, unless there's some. So I'm just putting that out there to council that maybe that needs to be done again for another year in order to put the money into something else if we have to cut.
Thank you. Any further questions in relation to the capital? Then I think we'll take a short break until we get the answer back from the clerk's office in relation to the previous question from Councillor Liggett, and I hope that will be in 10 minutes. 5 minutes. Thank you. I know we said we were going to have a 5-minute break, and we're going to extend that by 1 more minute, and then we'll get started.
I-45.
Okay, committee, we're going to reconvene and have, I think, James Goodrum has the answer to Councillor Liggett's question.
Okay, through the chair, we were able to find out that the police service has accessed film footage 14 times in 2018 and 3 times so far this year.
Thanks, James. And I know that there was some question about an annual report, and maybe we can get that in the future as to the use and success of the cameras.
Through the chair, that's something we can work with the city clerk's department on.
Thanks, James. Any other questions? Councillor Liggett.
It goes back to the Old Mill Road thing. Maybe Mr. Dietchen can answer it. Somebody in the audience asked me the question of what happens in a case like that. So the design, if it was the design of the culvert, if there was mistakes in that, who designed that plan? And if it's an outside contracted person, do we go back on them for it? Do we get reimbursed for this money now? Like, how does that work?
I'll ask you to answer that question, please.
Yeah, through the chair. We've been working through legal and realty services to assess, how to address the encroachment issue, which has been involved a fair amount of work with the property owners. We haven't gotten to the point of concern about who's responsible in that way.
Assumption maybe on my part. So if legal department's been working on that too, so it's not just the 400,000 for the rebuild now. It's also legal costs on our like staff legal costs, that sort of thing. That is on top of this?
Again, through the chair, yeah. I mean, there's a variety of costs involved in this. You know, there's work on the culvert. There's some work on how the storm drainage gets modified somewhat, and other compensation for plantings, for example.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks, James. Any further questions in relation to the capital budget? Seeing none, we do have the motion on the floor. And I want to make sure I give everybody the opportunity to ask any questions. And seeing none, I'm going to call the question. Those in favor? Those opposed? And the motion's carried unanimously. And I'll ask Cheryl if, no, I won't. I think what we're going to do is, sorry, Cheryl, I think we're going to move over to the operating budget now. And we have a couple of people in the audience as delegations. And the first group that I'm going to call forward would be Helen Kelly from the Idea Exchange. And welcome, Helen. And if you could come forward, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you for having me here today for members of Council and Mayor McGarry, City staff, and members of the audience. I'm really happy to have the opportunity to talk to you about what we do and to present our budget to you today. I'm going to start with sort of a high-level overview of what we offer. If it's been a while since you've been in our door, you might think that we're a dusty book place, and hopefully I can change that idea a little bit, and then I'll get into the budget details that will follow from that. So I'm going to start off with a question. What had 12 million more visits in Ontario alone, more than the NHL, the NBA, the NFL put together across North America in the past year? And that would be public libraries. That would be Ontario public libraries. And so to put that in perspective, Ontarians visit their public libraries a lot. There's no other public institution which gets 6.34 visits every second all year long. So every second that we sit here, there are 6.34 people visiting a public library in Ontario. Who goes to the public library? The answer is everybody goes to the public library. Children, families, teens, adults, seniors, voters, kids, moms, dads, parents, everybody goes to the public library. Public libraries have an important economic impact in Ontario, and they have a great return on investment. And so there's been a series of studies that have been done at about 24 Ontario public libraries, and it has been determined that the local economic impact show that for every dollar you invest, you get on average a $5.41 return for every dollar that you invest in the community. And the way that that's calculated is they often do user surveys, so they look at the folks who come in and say, well, how many books did you take out today? Did you use a computer? Did you use the Wi-Fi? What's the value of those services? And then they'll look at the services that are provided and calculate them per capita. So you're basically investing $1 and getting over a $5 return back on it. There's something else that's calculated, which is a social return on investment. And if you add in the social ROI, you actually get that much higher. And if we think back to what was done at Hespeler in our own community about a dozen years ago, there was a question as to whether the Carnegie Library would maybe be abandoned and the new Hespeler Library would go outside of the core. But it was decided, because of the social return on investment, that there would be an investment in the core and the size of that original library would be doubled. And part of the calculation was the foot traffic. So there are 2,600 in-person visits a week at the Hespeler Library. And that relates to a social return on investment, because there's a halo effect where people will visit businesses in the downtown core. There'll be foot traffic in the core. They will go grocery shopping. They'll buy things while they're there. So they do other things while they're visiting the library, and that brings a return on investment back to the core areas. Public libraries support Ontario's seniors. So a 2018 Nordicity study found that 44% of respondents reported using technology at the public library were actually introduced to something new they'd never tried before in technology. And 52% of those introduced to a new technology were over the age of 55. Public libraries also support poverty reduction. The same study found that 63% of respondents reported using technology at the public library, and they self-identified as low income. So this is technology they would not have had themselves in their own home. They're coming for access to the public library, which is welcoming to everyone. And people know the role of the public library. In a recent study from the Market Probe Canada report, these were the top 3 poll results. People felt that public libraries are important because they promote literacy and a love of reading. By providing free access to materials and resources, the public library plays an important role in giving everyone a chance to succeed. And having a public library improves the quality of life in a community. So what's happening locally? This was posted last week on a Twitter feed. I had the pleasure of visiting Idea Exchange Old Post Office space in the heart of my old neighborhood, and it was an excellent reminder of why libraries are the community hubs that our cities need. We're very good at working with community partners, and I want to give you a snapshot of that. We currently have over 50 community partners, and we're growing. A good example would be at our Preston location. We have partnered with the Rare Charitable Research Reserve, Seeds of Diversity Canada, and the Preston Community Garden to grow our community garden and our seed library. I think some of you know our seed library opened just over 2 years ago, and to date we've had over 3,000 seed packets that have been exchanged. It has been amazingly popular, and people are so excited to participate in something that contributes to sustainability and food security right in their own backyard. We connect people to vital community services by having those services in our spaces, which means that people can come into the public library and they don't feel stigmatized. They're coming into a space that's welcoming for everyone, but while they're there, they'll meet with someone who's really impactful in their life, a social service that they require. So we have newcomer services, employment counseling, English conversation circles, a community outreach worker, and Masters of Social Work placements in our spaces so that people can we can welcome them in our doors and they can come into a safe space and a space that's welcoming and comfortable, that doesn't stigmatize them in any way for visiting. We are engaging seniors in all sorts of things, partnering with Cambridge Third Age Learning, using tech one-on-one sessions to help people who might want to Skype with their grandchildren, having tech teens partnered with seniors so that they can learn technology together, attending book clubs. If seniors can't come to us, we go to them with our visiting library service. And our art gallery has been doing some really wonderful programming with seniors' residences and the Cambridge Self-Help Food Bank so that they're reaching marginalized seniors as well with art opportunities and opportunities for expression and social inclusion. We have ongoing lectures at the Old Post Office and volunteer opportunities. There are a lot of things for seniors to do in our spaces. Now I'm just going to get into some of the numbers from 2018. We know that the population in Cambridge is over 130,000. We had over 760,000 in-person visits at our locations last year, and our program attendance was over 78,000 people. To really look at that, though, our core service is towards families and children. We are the preschoolers' door to learning. So over 80% of our programs are attended by children and parents, and our children's program attendance has increased by 105% since 2010. We want you to expect more. We want to deliver an excellent service at the lowest cost possible. So in 2017, we achieved service equity across our 3 core areas by opening Hespeler, Preston, and Clemens Mill at 10 a.m. Previously, they had opened at noon. We had a lot of comments over many years where people really wanted those areas to open at 10 in the morning. And as we had been growing our children's services and offering more and more preschool programs, we had a service inequity happening because you could come in for story time, but you couldn't come in to read the newspaper because technically we weren't open. And that just didn't make sense as we started rolling out programs. I know at Hespeler, at one point, we had on a Wednesday morning 3 programs running. We had a baby program, we had a preschool program, and we had a knitting circle, but then we were telling people they couldn't come in because they weren't in the program and we weren't open. So that just didn't make sense. So we had to find a way to fix that. So by opening at 10 a.m., we have actually added 1,500 hours of library service annually, and of course we needed to make that sustainable. We couldn't just do it in 2017, we want to continue doing it. The way we did that was we looked at our capital improvements. So when people check things out now, they do it at a self-serve checkout station. We were then able to redeploy those staff and have them out on the floor helping people or shift when they were working. So by doing that, we were able to change the duties and redistribute them and also cross-train people with other things. It was at a very nominal budget increase at the time. It equated to about $10,000 for every 500 hours of library service annually, and we thought that was an excellent return on investment. So here's our 2018 budget overview just before we get to 2019, because there were a couple of things that we had to do in 2018 to make 2019 where we wanted to get it. We wanted to look at other grant opportunities because we know that the capital budget is limited at the city and we need to be proactive at looking at other opportunities. We were able to add an accessible door and pathway at our Preston Children's Community Garden, which was over 65% funded by a Government of Canada Enabling Accessibility grant. You can see it was in the amount of $20,131, and there's a picture of the walkway there. I must say it looks like it's always been there. It's really been a seamless way of adding accessibility into a wonderful community space. We also applied for and were successful at receiving a Cultural Spaces funding grant for 50% of the renovation to our art gallery vault to house our fiber art collection. We want to make sure that we are protecting the assets that we have, and we need to house all of our art in a proper facility that's got every piece now is in a storage that is custom for that piece. Because we have a lot of fiber art, some of it needs to be rolled up. It has to be on a roller to store it. So now we've looked at all of the pieces, we've got them all stored correctly, and they're in sort of a closed stack that you can open up, and we've got room for expansion if we want to do that in the future. And I think the big story from last year was working with the separate school board and community partners and the steering committee, being successful in receiving $545,000 to renovate the Clemens Mill Library. It's just wonderful. If you haven't been there and you haven't seen the different zones, the new public entrance with the great front door, the children's area, the student learning commons, the quiet study area, the virtual reality lab, and the meeting rooms. We did just open on Family Day from 12 to 4 p.m. We had over 400 people through the door, and the place was absolutely packed. They were using all of the new tech. They were checking out all of the toys. Eric Traplin was there, and it was just an incredible experience just this last Monday for 4 hours at our Clemensville location. We've also expanded our art gallery programs through project grant funding. And some of these are very small grants, but they're incredibly impactful. And a few of the pictures that you see there, the one on the right and the one in the very bottom, are from our Transformed Through Touch art exhibition. And that was something that we did in partnership with the W. Ross McDonald School. And one of the 15-year-old deaf-blind students there designed and composed 7 multisensory rooms incorporating works by her deaf-blind peers, inviting the general public to enter her personal journey of navigating everyday situations that are fraught with obstacles that demand perseverance and advocacy. It was such an impactful thing that we were able to do with such a small amount of money. And we've been really excited the way that we've been successfully getting really great art experiences into our community. We've also been accessing other funding sources for tech at the old post office. As you may recall, we successfully secured $50,000 from Toyota, which has funded our laser cutter and our third-floor classroom tech. Over $6,600 was raised through the community through the sale of the historic slate tiles, and that was $20 at a time. Thank you very much, Monograms, for doing that for us. They actually cleaned the tiles, they advertised the tiles, they sold the tiles. That was a complete fundraising success. And that's gone to some of the STEAM kits that you see when you go into the Discovery Centre on the 2nd floor. And we've also accessed $120,000 from a behest that we received from Thomas Taylor. That's been funding our teen tech that you currently see in the building, and it will power a video wall which is coming soon. So that's a little bit of a teaser. We've got the infrastructure behind the wall, and the wall will be up soon. This is our approach to our 2019 budget. We want to continuously improve what we do and have a lean process so that we can deliver effective and efficient services and programs. So throughout 2018, we continually looked at our budget. This was not a 1-month or a 2-month process. This was a 12-month process. We also noted that we needed to achieve the $125,000 sustainable budget reduction that was requested by City Council. We did a line-by-line comparison of our budget, actuals, and evaluation of trends over time, and an evaluation of all of our vacant positions. We were able to achieve the $125,000 that was requested by Council for 2018, and we also found additional efficiencies to fund security guards. Because we had had increased incidents in primarily our downtown location in Galt, we put in a number of things in places. So we added extra security cameras, we did staff training on de-escalation, we put in a code of conduct and a trespass policy. There was a whole basket of items that we did. But we now, when we're open, 67% of the time we have a security guard. And from 2017 to 2018, we have reduced our incidents by 40%. But it just seemed disingenuous that we would take the budget reduction you asked us for and then put money back in for security. So we tried to cover both of them, and we were able to do that. And finally, we did a review of our reserve funds so that we could smooth out our operating impacts from capital. Because we know we have a new location, and when you have a new location, you're going to have an increase in operating expenses. But if we can take a draw from reserves, and we're going to do it over 3 years, this is the time that we would want to go into our reserves, which are a rate stabilization reserve, and be able to stabilize that rate over a 3-year period. So in our 2019 budget submission, we have not requested an increase for established operations. So all of our established operations, we will be funding from our current budget. That also includes the new security guards costing that I talked about. And then when I talked about our materials rate stabilization reserve, the board has approved withdrawing $70,000 in 2019, $50,000 in 2020, and $30,000 in 2021. Because if we were only to do a draw in 2019, it would be a false saving. You would then see an increase going back up in the following year. What we want to do is smooth out that increase so that the impact from operating is reduced. So our operating budget increase that we are requesting is 3.08. and that is only related to the 2019 portion of the new operating costs of the old post office. I know that you saw a table that was up earlier, that's on page 4 of the budget summary, and to put that in perspective, because the library is about 8% of the entire city budget, so a 3.08% increase for us is not 3.08 for the whole city. It's actually 1/4% of an increase to the tax levy, and that's outlined in the chart that I believe Councillor Mann was talking about earlier when he was looking at the fire and CAD impacts. It's on page 4 of the budget summary that shows you that that would be 1/4% of an increase. I just want to highlight the old post office since that is the piece we're asking for an increase on. As you know, it is an award-winning building. The 2018 Award of Excellence from Canadian Architect. We know that it won the Old and New Architectural Review Award, and an award that hasn't been picked up yet. The architect Tyler Sharp will be going to Spain later on in the year to the Guggenheim Museum to pick up an international award. And it's also received, as we know, recent recognition from the National Capital Commission as an excellent example of adaptive reuse in Canada. Of course, we're also interested in what's happening in the building. And we received a really wonderful post from a visitor, and I'm just going to read it very briefly. We got this in January. Yesterday, I visited Cambridge's renovated old post office, which is called the Idea Exchange. It's an inspiring demonstration of Canadian architecture, green building, immaculate renovation, innovative reuse of space, ultra-modern facilities, emerging high-tech equipment for the public, and an investment in developing digital skills for everyone. I got the impression that kids can readily set up their own companies to compete with our company. And this was a visitor from Guelph who is an engineer working in an engineering company in Guelph, and that was his impression of the old post office as a first visitor. We're also pleased to say that we offer award-winning services and programs across our organization. As I said, Children's is a pillar of the service that we offer. We're really thrilled to have won first place in 2012 and second place in 2017 in the National TD Summer Reading Club Public Library Award. There are about 150 libraries across Canada that apply for that. So coming in first and second in the last few years is quite amazing. And in fact, you can only apply every other year so that the competition is fair. And we're also pleased to be a 2017 Gold Level Best Employer. That means that you need to have 95% engagement of your staff filling out this survey. We do it every 3 years. It means that we had 80% engagement to be a gold level employer. So we know that our staff are really happy with the service they're delivering, they love what they're doing, and they're engaged when they're serving the public. I want to thank you for supporting us because we can't deliver first-class cutting-edge programming and service excellence without you. So thank you very much for supporting everything that we do and for allowing me to come and talk to you about the budget today.
Thank you, Helen. As always, an excellent presentation, and we're always thrilled to see the use out of our public libraries and the interaction that we have from all levels of the community, from the very youngest to the most mature. And we hear that all the time, and congratulations to you and your staff for a job well done. And just before you leave there, I just want to ask if there are any questions of the committee of Helen and her presentation. Councillor Wolf.
Through you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Helen, again for a wonderful presentation. One of the things I'm looking forward to is the workshop next in March using the laser cutter. And one thing I noticed when we went to Halifax with the council, and they were very impressed with the library in Halifax. But I found I was saying over and over, oh, you know, we have that service too. We have that service too. And I would wonder if you could maybe set up, after budget's all over, maybe a tour of the various libraries for council, and maybe they too would like to learn how to use the laser cutter at the old post office.
Through you, Mr. Chair, to Councillor Wolf. We would be delighted to set up a laser cutting workshop for you. Councillor Wolf is on our board, and so on, if I'm remembering, it's Tuesday, March the 5th. We're going to have our board members in for a special visit to the old post office where they will have a choice of projects where they can learn how to use the laser cutter. And this actually was requested by board members because they're excited to find out what the new technology is in the building and to see how it works. So if you'd like to come over and have a workshop with us on the laser cutter or the 3D printer, we would be happy to have you in our doors as well.
Thank you. Any other questions of Helen? I do have one. And I wonder if you can just give me a breakdown of the $222,000 for the operation of the old post office. I know some of that will be staff, some will be utilities. Do you have any kind of breakdown on what those expenses are?
It's a little bit tricky because we're doing the draw from reserves. So because we're doing the $70,000 draw from reserves, that comes right off of the top, right? We would have been we would have been $70,000 higher. So it doesn't quite break down perfectly. Generally speaking, the majority of those, our two biggest expenditures would be staff and materials. Now, in this case, a lot of that will be extra staff to staff a new building over the various floors, because as I pointed out, we've purchased a lot of the materials up front and we were able to go to alternate sources of funding for that.
Thanks, Helen. Any other questions? Thanks very much.
Thank you.
The next person I'd like to call on is Patrick Milady. And Patrick is in the audience this afternoon. Are you ready to proceed with your delegation, Patrick?
No, I'm not. No, I am not prepared to give my delegation. My lack of preparation arises out of the anticipation of a 6:30 p.m. delegation, and I guess the question I have is, so if I don't make the delegation now, am I going to find out that at 6:30 p.m. there are no delegations? Well,
Sorry, can you repeat that question?
The question is if I don't make a delegation now, am I going to get shut down at 6:30 saying, sorry, there are no delegations?
No, you won't.
Well, thank you. I'm glad to hear that. If this means I have to go home and read the newspaper and come back at 6:30, I'd be happy to do that. Thank you.
Thanks, Patrick.
Pardon? For how many? I can get pizza if you need it. Yes. Thank you.
Is there anyone else in the audience who wants to come forward as a delegation? Okay, there's no one else, so we will adjourn now until 6:30 this evening, and at that time delegations will come forward, and we have a list of delegations for tonight. So to those who have presented this afternoon, thank you very much. We appreciate what you have done, and like I said, we'll reconvene again at 6:30 this evening. Thank you.